So when I'm working with history, I'm describing aesthetic qualities. So I'm describing characters. And what we witness when we look at history are replications of the grand cosmology of the universe itself. And one of the most difficult things to understand in a fractal sense, supercosmologically, is the paradigm of the black hole. And so what I suggest from a theoretical physics position and standpoint is that space-time and relativity give us the perspective due to the myopic vision of humanity and the species that we are living outside of or beyond the event horizon of a black hole. But this to me is a non sequitur, because insofar as we are in proximity to a black hole, which is to say insofar as a black hole exists, we are already and we are always already within it. This is the orientation of the cosmos towards the most dense gravitational field. It's a sort of perennial hyperspace, and we are sort of lulled to sleep, or we're in the lullaby of locality, which is to say the neutrality and perpetual motion of a neighborhood which is locked into a lockstep of a space-time dance due to mutually enforced gravitational pulls. This again is relativity. So when we contextualize this makes me think about the 1970s in the Bronx in New York City. Or it makes me think about the historical ruins of empire. And it makes me think about being in time and the concept of ostraka, potsherd, and imperfection. The idea that when we describe most of my previous work is a sort of timeless, immortal, infinite metaphysics of the character, the characterological nature of the cosmos. But my work now, right, and I've realized the deeper importance is through the hyperspace object, which is the cultural object as potsherd, which is to say a revelation of the eternal through the Charnel house and the ruins of the temporal. And if you've ever seen, I'm going to include as one of my pictures here, the Bronx in the 1970s. We are talking about, through the corruption and the corrosion, and through the disillusion and disillusionment, which again is a material status, a phenomenological status of that which appears to be. Right? What is revealed to us is the deepest, darkest density, the gravitational pull which orients and organizes the cosmos in a greater systemic sense. We leave the locality of the neighborhood of human perception, just as much as we leave the locality of the neighborhood of the Milky Way. We're entering into a space of absolute creational energy, which again is the return to a quantum mechanics of metaphysical awareness, wherein being in space-time is haunted by an infinite nature, and the artifact consciousness draws out the character of that infinite nature as a characterological overturning of being in time. And this is what I mean by the importance of the cultural object, especially historical detritus, particularly historical detritus that comes from evolutionary and revolutionary moments of paradigm shift. Because what these moments represent historically in a seismographic sense are sinkholes, both in a cosmic and a collective consciousness, where this lockstep of locality and relativity is abolished in the form of and in the name of chaos, which is disillusion and disillusionment. It's a sort of particulate accelerator which breaks apart the fundament of the physical rules and laws of nature, the lockstep of relative reality, which is to say an ecosystemic condition, a delicate homeostasis. And this again is the nature of the atmosphere of the earth providing shelter for a league of mammalian animals, right? Or plant life that can be fostered and nurtured under this perilous distance of the radiation of the sun, the stellar nuclear forge, which is itself forging us and forging all things elementally and chemically. So when I look at, and this is what's so fascinating about archetypally, historically, when you look at empires and civilizations of stone, it is simultaneously what remains and what crumbles into rubble. This is a sort of symbology of chaos, or a chaos theory of history, wherein we are recovering the bones. And these bones are different. And this is what's so fascinating about an anthropological vision of history. Because when we're looking at bones, we're looking at paradigms of information. This is everything from digital information, in terms of pixelated light, like pixelated data, to the potsherd of the ancient Mayan, to the bubblegum card, which I love so much, of baseball as a civilizational and cultural object of America's pastime. And my vision of history is a sort of scream, which is the black hole sink of this swirl, right, of this breaking apart of space-time to reveal the quantum mechanics beneath the phenomenological, Newtonian physical, which is a trance in the midst of hyperspace, a brief unity, a temporary agreement of forms, a consent at the cellular and molecular level to construct and create life. And this is what's so fascinating about the nature of being and creativity. Is again, right, when we enter into this awareness of the black hole horizon in a cosmological sense, and this itself being always already the case. The event horizon is to say that we are already within the event horizon, which is to say we are already within the black hole, and as such, time is being rent asunder. But this is perceptual. This is a perceptual relative mechanism. It's a way of perception through the myopic human being form, which is its own semblance of private entropy in terms of a thermodynamically controlled organism with an entropic half-life. It itself is undergoing its own private corrosion. And so when we are envisioning history, we're looking at different time spans and lifespans of structures, whether those structures are planets or solar systems or galactic networks of energetic exchange through stellar forges and relative dynamics, which are processing, projecting, and producing radiation. But we're also looking at, when we look at the condensation of space-time and the grounding of space-time into a human context, this is what we're talking about in terms of a anthropic history, but also a cultural history. And the cultural history is where it gets fascinating, because cultural history is a particle accelerator, a fomentation of creative energy through the condensation of relative energy, which is to say being in time, in relation. And this is what's so fascinating historically about New York as a particle accelerator of culture, if you can understand this. And so when we're talking about this is the intersection between physics and culture, which is the hyperspace of metaphysics, which produces the character and form and formulation of being itself proper in time, which is the revelation of the character of being as it shapeshifts, like a snake shedding its skin in history, to represent ever clearer the true nature and character of the creative, playful will. And this is what is required, is that humanity itself is an alchemical bath of stellar nuclear physics, and is producing through itself an ever more revelated, as in the phenomenology of culture, which is to say Basquiat or Keith Haring or the photography in the Bronx of the 1970s, which is reproductive of this creative quality, which is most apparent in the rubble void space of the revelation, which is the deconstruction of the phenomenological Newtonian physical entranced somnambulistic appearance of that which is to say also the biomechanical nature of the human being with its own private half-life and metabolic forge, but also the construct of civilization, as well as the local neighborhood of the solar system. And this goes back to the last essay and the last oration, is what is required as a dissolution, in that humanity is an alchemical bath, that to sit in hell, as Marie-Louise von France says, I'm reproducing this quote here again, is to bring forth the philosopher's stone, and the philosopher's stone itself is the nature of that which emerges from the void, which is the clarity of the possibility of the depiction of the true nature or characterological essence of the will, out from under this seemingly impenetrable, dense, opaque, phenomenological return of the hypnotic everyday. So we're calling out from under the rubble of history, and this is why I represent the primordial scream as a black hole sink, as a way of visualizing both cosmological and cultural history, because we're looking at a primordial overturning, which is in real time the phenomenological or the relative appearance of that which is being rent in a deep space and deep time sense, but it's being metabolized through the human being as a slowed process. This is all time-scale relationship, and it's visualization of time as experience. And the human being is experiencing time as the human body is experiencing time. So at the most fulmigatory level, culture, right, as a paradigm of overturnings of fashion, which is to say an aesthetic status of the cultural object. And the cultural object itself here is being in time, its history itself, but is fragmented into potsherd. And this returns us to the mythography of Dionysus and Osiris and Christ as representations of the cosmic body in time, revealing itself. The fragmentation of the historical body, the cultural body, into artifact consciousness, which is the object which retains the aesthetic status of history, which is to say the moment in time which produced it, created it. And we are always already looking into the past and gesturing into the past in regards to the cultural object of history, which is itself being in time. This is the unrecoverable, yet tinctured, fractured, again, to gesture to Blake, as always, chink in the cavern truth of the nature of being refracted through the implicit and explicit space-time relationships that are occurring in that moment in time. So this is to say New York in the 1970s, just as it is to say when I'm saying explicit, and then I say implicit, which is referencing the cosmological order, which is to say the tipping of the gravitational balance of the scales of the dynamism of the cosmos in terms of planetary and stellar relationships. This is all supported by the same creative force which emerges through paradigmatic social, cultural, political collapse. And revelated, just as hip-hop is in the Bronx in the 1970s, through this vehicle of high strangeness, which is the sublime emerging through the dynamic collapse of an ecosystem. And the emergence of the sublime is the emergence of the creative will out from under the rubble of history. And this is the experience of the black hole. It's the warping of the phenomenological into the prophetic, which is the revelation of the transcendental or the essential dimension, which emerges phenomenologically as an experience. The essential dimension, insofar as it can be perceived as phenomenological. So when we look at pictures of the rubble in the Bronx in the 1970s, and we understand what emerges through it, Basquiat, Keith Haring, punk, hip-hop, we're looking at a break in time, a rift. And through that rift is channeled and funneled the primordial, which is strapless, so to speak. And what I mean by strapless is that it's not undergirded any more or any further by the somnambulistic illusion of this solar system locality, which is the perpetual reaffirming and reestablishment of systemic and systematic relationships, which undergird and affirm the predictable elements of, you could say, the blue sky or the rise and fall of the sun, which themselves are entranced solar systemic and cosmological conditions, which themselves are perpetually affirming and confirming the experience on the sedimental ground level procedure of the historical. So when you understand that cosmological supersystem informing the overturning of the everyday in a civilizational sense, and then you bring that down into layers of perception and dynamism, which is to say change over time, we enter into the realm of empires, and then we enter into the realm of culture and empires as perennial, perpetual overturnings of circumstances, sets of dynamic circumstance, such as the Bronx in the 1970s, and what these crusts of history produce when they crumble, which is to say they produce a replication of the primordial void state of the black hole sink, which is in actuality the grand cosmological experience in real time, which is a revelation of the primordial essential human condition, which again returns us to existentialism, the negation, the void, and the experience in which and when history is stripped back, much as it is in a global sense with World War II. And the phenomenological conditions out from under the hypnosis of civilization or cultural standards or formations which are reaffirmed and propped up by predictable outlets such as a currency or a national status or a religious status. When these are dropped away, we are presented with the primordial negation, which is native to the black hole sink, which is also native to the human being in a very profound way. If we're going to bring this back to a quantum mechanical understanding of the energetic status which undergirds the appearance of Newtonian physics. So when we're looking at a photograph like this, when we're looking at the cultural object, this is always already in a state of primal and primordial tension, as in artifact consciousness, between the absolute and the character of the absolute which emerges in time, and thus retains a certain status as in a figuration with certain characteristics. And this is waveform physics. This is the appearance of that which is acquiring density. And in acquiring density, it acquires gravity. and in acquiring density, it acquires relationship. Conceive of gravity as a primordial magnetism, as a physics of relationship. So this is what is breaking through time. And this is what is so important about the child at play in the rubble in the Bronx in the 1970s, is that we're looking at the metaphysical relationship of being in time. And the dissolution of history, which produces the necessary fragmentation to perceive the historical artifact. And this is the perennial absence, as in past distance, of the cultural object itself. So now we're getting into a very profound metaphysics of physics, in the sense that molecular status is always at its deepest, most groundswell level a separative, in that these molecules themselves are in a state of, I'll say, repellation to retain their status as individuals. And yet they're holding together a vehicle. Whether you want to conceive of that vehicle as an individual, whether you want to conceive of that vehicle as a set of ecosystemic circumstances, or a set of cosmological circumstances, this status is of a primordial void of negation, which is an inverse electromagnetism. That the universe itself is repelled from itself as it descends into primordial negation, as in the black hole state of being torn asunder. And this is always the question of revealing the absolute out from under nuclear fission. This is the creative and destructive power of the universe, insofar as we can visualize it energetically in an astrophysical sense. Fission and fusion, which themselves are effectively the same process. And what's so fascinating to me is that this physical status, it's one thing to become entranced with the actual phenomenological movement of the particle or the atom being torn asunder or rendering elementally. But it's another thing to observe the scalar relationships and dynamics of this metaphysical process as it descends down into increasingly fragmentary, hyper-accelerating, microcosmic overturnings, which is the progressive half-life of the descent of the grand cosmological status of being, down into time, which again is half and half and half, which is the experience of a hyper-accelerated, again, a hyperdrive of this essential creative cosmological metabolic essence, which is the change over time, which is the change into time, which if we're going to look at this archetypally, the snake is shedding its skin with increasing rapidity. And this again has to do with thermodynamic status. And this is what we're examining and what we're looking at when we're talking about change over time, even if you just want to locate it and localize it in a solar systemic sense. So when we look at the change over time in American civilization, and this is why, for me, I focus so deeply on modernity, the moment that the human species cracks 1900, what is it, AD, I guess that's what they want to call it. That moment in the 100 years, in the 125 years after 1900, you have this massive, again, due to industrialization, which is the harnessing of the elemental powers latent within the body of the earth. The harnessing of those powers with increasing awareness, consciousness as to the recombinative nature of these powers, which is again massively aided, if not in an entirely culturally or socially conscious way and sense, by quantum mechanics and quantum physics. which is the revelation of the energetic dimension out from under the Newtonian, which is the phenomenological. This full sweep, moving into personal computational devices, artificial intelligence, from the airplane, from the car, from the light bulb, from the factory, right? This full sweep of advances creates an utterly unrecognizable metaphysical landscape which the human being is interacting with in a dynamic futurity. In the sense that this landscape is utterly unprecedented in the long time span, so to speak, of human consciousness. But not only that, it's the creation in the repurposing and recombination, as we've discussed, of the elemental and chemical conditions, which have henceforth been formed and nurtured as in the grounds of being in time in an earthly sense, even just in the nature of the history of the earth, that are now being repurposed, mechanized, as in quite literally natural gases out from the prehistoric time of this sludge that is being dredged up from the depths of the earth, right? This hyper carnal, dense, dynamic energy, which is now being exploded back up in a gaseous sense and being used to turn the lock of energetic engines and machines to power this new metropolis. We're looking at a profound process of excavation of deep time to power this rocket ship of the present, which creates and turns an utterly unrecognizable political, social, and cultural reality that even as it is being created, it fails to sustain itself homeostatically in an ecosystemic sense, crumbles, and out from under it emerges this twisted cybernetic cultural force, which is the unity of this hyperfuturity and hyperspace and hyperdrive, which is now being populated by city streets and city blocks with this organic, organismic, fleshly, natural, green vine entangled wilderness of the human body, which is a deep time product, again. And this strange unity that emerges out from this mingling of the extension of the human network, the nervous system veins and fingers of the human body into wires and machines, which ever more rapidly are reproducing political realities which have unintended, unseen, inexplicable after effects in the human being's ability to perceive, beyond the human being's ability to perceive. And this is what we're talking about with the sublime, the historical sublime, which to me is utterly particular to modernity, because we've entered into this new dimension, this new time. And that's really what I want to introduce here. I'm not going to make this longer than it needs to be. That's what I got. I'll catch you on the next one.